Good evening. I'm Robert MacNeil in New York.
And I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. After our summary of the news, we turn first to the Attorney General's rebuff of a congressional call for an investigation of U.S. pre-war policy toward Iraq. Then Elizabeth Brackett reports on voter reaction to the Clinton-Gore Midwestern Roadshow. And Charlene Hunter-Gault talks with former President Jimmy Carter in another of her Can We All Get Along conversations.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Attorney General William Barr today refused to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate allegations of misconduct in U.S. policy toward Iraq. Among other things, a House committee wanted a prosecutor to determine whether Bush administration officials violated the law in giving Iraq assistance before the Gulf War. In a letter to the committee, Mr. Barr said the allegations were too vague and general to warrant such an investigation. We'll have more on the story right after the news summary. Meanwhile, in Iraq, UN weapons inspectors completed a second day of searches, apparently without incident. Iraq last week declared government ministries off limits to the inspectors. The team's leader would not say where the inspectors have gone or what, if anything, they've found so far. Judy? The next round of Middle East peace talks will be held in Washington on August 24th. President Bush made that announcement today at his Kennebunkport, Maine vacation home, during the first of 2 days of talks with Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Mr. Bush said he hoped the Rabin visit would strengthen an already strong relationship between their countries. Rabin had this to say during a picture-taking session at the beginning of the meeting.
We would like to make sure that there is better and more intimate relationship between our two countries, our two peoples, and our two governments. And let's hope that this visit will give the chance to at least make clear where we stand, what we can do together to achieve these goals.
President Bush did not make any campaign appearances today. Instead, White House advisor Clayton Yeiter held a news conference and claimed that Bill Clinton would raise taxes by $150 billion over the next 4 years. Clinton disputed the charge. Campaigning in Philadelphia, he said voters can expect such a tax before the Republican convention, including the contention that we're going to tax and spend to death.
In Afghanistan, bombs pounded the capital of Kabul today. The fighting was between the rival Muslim groups that overthrew the former Soviet-backed government in April. The new government's defense ministry said more than 1,000 people were killed or wounded in the assault. It said government troops repulsed the offensive. That's it for the news summary. Just ahead, the Justice Department says no to investigating pre-war Bush aid to Iraq. The Clinton-Gore bus tour, and former President Jimmy Carter considers relations between blacks and whites in America. We do lead tonight with the Justice Department's decision to reject calls for an independent counsel on Iraq. Today's announcement is the latest development in a heated controversy. At the center is the failed administration policy of giving Iraq billions of dollars in aid prior to the Gulf War. The aid was intended to bring Saddam Hussein into line with U.S. Mideast policy. But many House Democrats say that in the process, the administration misled Congress. We start with this backgrounder from correspondent Kwame Holman.
Well before the start of the Gulf War, the United States and some of its allies had been fueling the Iraqi military machine they ultimately defeated. The West openly sold food, technology, and weapons to Iraq during its 8-year war with Iran. The U.S. hoped its trade with Iraq would encourage Saddam Hussein to be a moderate force to counterbalance the Muslim fundamentalist regime of Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. On Capitol Hill, Deputy Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger recounted the administration's hopes for Iraq.
It appeared that Iraq had made a conscious decision to moderate its behavior since we had normalized relations in 1984. Iraq had, for example, reduced its support for terrorist groups and had, in fact, expelled the Abu Nidal organization from its soil. Iraq also appeared seriously interested in economic reconstruction and in expanding commercial ties with the West.
Eagleberger said the Iraq policy had been carefully thought out and executed. But members of Congress are charging that the administration continued those policies despite evidence that Iraq was abusing the aid. That charge has been led by House Banking Committee Chairman Henry Gonzalez. He began a one-man crusade, often speaking to an empty House chamber about his suspicions of abuse of Iraqi aid. In particular, he focused on a federal export loan program under what's called the Commodity Credit Corporation.
From the beginning of the U.S.-Iraq relationship in 1982-83 until the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, this program, known as the Commodity Credit Corporation Program, was a cornerstone of the U.S.-Iraq relations, and the food, supposedly food, financed by the program was used as a political tool to improve relations with Iraq.
The Commodity Credit Corporation is part of the Federal Department of Agriculture. It promotes foreign sales of American farm goods. The CCC gives credit-strapped nations loan guarantees which allow them to borrow money to purchase U.S. agricultural products. If the countries don't repay the loans, the U.S. government must. According to Gonzalez, Iraq, through much of the 1980s, and with the encouragement of administration officials, obtained nearly $5 billion from U.S. banks, money guaranteed by the U.S. government. Iraq has since defaulted on almost $2 billion of those U.S.-backed loans.
There were kickbacks on the part of the Iraqi to persons doing business with them in America. And despite the fact that Iraq was in such dire financial trouble that it could not repay its debts even to the United States Export-Import Bank, this systematic deception cost the U.S. taxpayer about $2 billion because Iraq defaulted on all its CC debts when it invaded Kuwait.
Congressman Gonzalez and several news organizations have detailed a cozy relationship between Iraq and one bank in particular, the Atlanta branch of Banco Nazionale del Lavoro, a bank owned by the Italian government. Between 1985 and 1990, BNL supplied almost $1 billion to Iraq in loans guaranteed by the U.S. government's CCC program. Iraq reportedly borrowed more than it needed and used the surplus to buy weapons. BNL also allegedly supplied Iraq with an additional $3 billion in secret illegal loans. Gonzalez charges that money also was used to buy weapons. In 1989, the FBI raided BNL and charged bank director Christopher Drogoul with failing to report the $3 billion the bank loaned to Iraq. Gonzalez says the Justice Department delayed Drogoul's indictment for at least a year.
Could it have been that, like other U.S. programs that benefited Iraq, the indictment was delayed to ensure cozy relations with Iraq? Several Justice Department spokesmen have denied foreign policy consideration played a role in delaying the BNL indictment.
The State Department's Eagleberger denied the administration had dragged its feet in the BNL investigation or on other allegations relating to aid to Iraq.
The selective disclosure out of context of classified documents has led, knowingly or otherwise, to distortions of the record, half-truths, and outright falsehoods, all combined into spurious conspiracy theories and charges of a cover-up. Neither the Agriculture Department's investigation of the Commodity Credit Corporation program nor the U.S. Attorney's investigation of BNL Atlanta has, to date, established diversion to third countries of commodities sold to Iraq or Iraqi misuse of the CCC program to purchase military weapons.
But Gonzalez charges a concerted attempt by the administration to prevent his committee from getting information on all aspects of Iraq policy.
In order to minimize public exposure to the embarrassing, failed U.S. policy towards Iraq, Just after the fighting in the Gulf ended, the White House formed a group of high-level agency attorneys headed by the National Security's General Counsel to frustrate, evade, and stifle congressional investigations. It was a gang. And just like street gangs are out there for their own purposes of evading this, that, and the other, and mugging, this gang was there for the purpose of mugging the Congress.
Gonzalez urged the House Judiciary Committee to recommend that the Justice Department appoint an independent counsel to investigate whether any laws were broken in relation to the various allegations surrounding Iraqi policy and BNL.
The Banking Committee is not a prosecutorial nor a judicial body, and the appointment of an independent counsel seems to be the only alternative in determining whether or not any crimes have been committed and whether or not any U.S. government officials or those outside the government aided or abetted in violating U.S. laws. Only an independent counsel could perform a disinterested review of the matters raised in this extraordinary case.
The House Judiciary Committee formally asked for an independent investigation in a letter to Attorney General Barr last month. Today, the Justice Department rejected that call and said the allegations were vague and general. A written statement by Attorney General William Barr said the Judiciary Committee request, quote, contains no specific information or allegation concerning any person. It also does not specify any conduct that is alleged to constitute a crime. We take up the debate over today's decision with two members of the Judiciary Committee. Charles Schumer is a Democrat from New York. Bill McCollum is a Republican of Florida. Congressman McCollum, why is it that the Attorney General turned down an investigation of this array of allegations?
Well, first of all, the Attorney General did not turn down an investigation. He has an ongoing investigation of all of the allegations that could possibly be on the table. In fact, he sent, accompanying the letter to Chairman Brooks of the Judiciary Committee, a 100-page report detailing what's going on and what his department is doing in regard to this. But what he said was that the statute was not complied with. In other words, that to appoint a special prosecutor is a very particular and peculiar thing that we do under a statute, a very unusual circumstance. He said, first of all, and I think it's quite true, that in Chairman Brooks' letter to the Justice Department, there was no indication, no naming of any senior executive official that would require the appointment of an independent counsel. And then there was a second provision where the Attorney General had discretion in appointing an independent counsel. That second provision of the law says that there has to be specific information from a credible source naming a person and a particular criminal act, and there has to be a conflict of interest within the Justice Department before a special prosecutor is appointed to investigate the non-covered, non-senior executive officials of the government who might be involved. And what the Attorney General has said, and it's very true in looking at Chairman Brooks's letter, there was no naming of any particular individual or any particular criminal act associated with an individual, and so there was no basis upon which to bring a claim, bring a special prosecutor into this. And last but not least, if I might finish, the Attorney General said, well, we've looked at this. We've found two possible allegations that might warrant, so far with credible evidence, us looking at them, but they're routine things we normally prosecute routinely through our system here, and we're looking at that real hard, and here's the details on it, and if we need to go forward and indict somebody, we'll do it.
All right, Congressman Schumer, you understand what the other side, what the Attorney General and Congressman McCollum are saying. How do you respond to that?
Well, when you read the Attorney General's response, it doesn't seem like someone who's interested in getting to the bottom of a very messy and murky situation, but rather a lawyer's brief saying, well, I might have found this technical place that doesn't require me to appoint an independent counsel to get to the bottom of it. The fact of the matter is that the letter from the Judiciary Committee to the Attorney General outlined numerous possible criminal violations. What the Attorney General, well, I can read them. 18 U.S.C. 371, that's conspiracy to defraud the United States. 18 U.S.C. 1001, making a false statement. 18 U.S.C. 1505, obstruction of justice. And the list goes on and on.
You're saying the specifics are there.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is what the Attorney General seems to be saying is that you have to name for me name, date, place, motive. In other words, you have to have all the facts ready so that we would be able to indict the person. That's not what the independent counsel is about. What he's saying, in a sense, is if you're the victim of a mugging, You have to have a videotape of the mugging and the perpetrator in handcuffs in order for them to prosecute. It's ridiculous.
Is that what you're saying, Congressman McCollum?
I disagree with Chuck on that altogether. There's no requirement that you have to have every detail wrapped up, but you've got to name some people and you've got to make some allegations. You don't have to prove the case, but you've got to point the finger in some direction. And the Attorney General is saying, technically you didn't comply, but we went ahead and looked at this anyway. We looked at it, and we looked at all the possible violations we could find, and we only found 2 instances where we thought, and we were revealing all of this to you because he gave a long, detailed report, and we're looking at that. We routinely do this in our public integrity section. We have alleged criminal violations every day with regard to the kind of petty things that are brought up here. This is pure politics, and I really believe that, because if we allow this to continue to happen with a special prosecutor brought up with this kind of vague allegation that Chairman Brooks sent down there, you know, we're going to have Judge Walsh cases running out our ears, and that's why the independent counsel statute is being allowed to expire right now on December 15th.
Pure politics? Is that what it is?
Well, look, first, 2 allegations are hardly routine. One, that someone in the White House, high level, called up the assistant U.S. attorney down in Atlanta and said the case would be embarrassing. Now, we don't know what else was said. That's hardly routine. If that's happening every day in the Justice Department, then we have real trouble.
Was there a name associated with that?
Well, first of all,
just a moment, Congressman McCollum.
There was, in the report that the Judiciary Committee sent, the assistant U.S. attorney who talked about this gave a few people who might be named. We don't know the specific name. That's the job of the independent counsel to find out. And you don't need a specific name. You need some serious, credible, and specific allegations. That is a specific allegation. It didn't say they're covering up everything. It said there were calls from the White House to Atlanta. Second allegation.
Well, just a moment. All right, well, let's let him respond to this one, and we'll come back to the second one.
Let me just say that the problem is here that the Attorney General said he looked into that, and he didn't find any evidence of any criminal act at all. You might question a call down there, but it was only a status call. He said, we didn't find anything there, and you didn't name anybody for us to find it for. So, I mean, that's the bottom line.
But there was an indictment delayed and a plea bargain arranged that the judge involved said that he thought was suspicious.
Exactly. The judge, who has a lifetime appointment, said there ought to be an independent counsel.
And this was in connection with the Lavoro Bank.
Right.
Congressman McCollum, what are you saying the Attorney General is saying about all that activity, the Justice Department getting involved in that case?
Well, first of all, the Justice Department is very much involved in the BNL case. The Justice Department's had an investigation. It looks like it's doing quite a fine job with it. I have reviewed some of the things that they've done that at least is public enough for me to look at. It's a very complicated white-collar criminal case, and they're into it big time. So I don't see a problem with that part of it. And for an individual judge to conclude we need a special prosecutor, on what basis? I just don't see it right now. I don't see where there's any evidence that's here. And quite frankly, again, we're looking at, you know, Judge Walsh spent over $30 million for 5 years running up the tab in Iran-Contra, hasn't gotten any of the criminal convictions he got upheld if he got, and what he did was, you know, relatively minor. I think the American taxpayers are fed up with special prosecutors, understandably. We all need to go back and look at that again.
Well, is that what you're saying was the real reason behind this, was because the amount of money spent on Iran-Contra?
Well, I think the reason behind the whole letter that went down in the first place is politics. I think it's an election year. I think if we all look back this coolly and collectively, we'd understand. You don't want to subject people to this sort of thing.
You can bring up the charge of politics all the time. I understand that. And just as you feel that Democrats sending a letter would be politics, Democrats feel a Republican administration investigating the charge would be politics. The one fair way to deal with this is not have a Democratic Congress investigate or a Republican Justice Department on some very serious charges that could affect the president who's appointed the Attorney General his whole career.
There's absolutely no shred of evidence. There's no shred of evidence, Chuck, the president's implicated in this at all?
If I could finish.
No shred of evidence?
No, but I said it could affect the president if it was found that high-level people in the administration either aided and abetted or covered up the sale of military weapons to Iraq. And Iraq is the president's leading piece on his center plate. It could certainly affect the election.
Where's the idea they covered it up? You haven't named anybody. You've got vague allegations out there, no names, no specific crimes. That's the whole point.
Is there a
You're raising stuff without getting specific.
Is there a suspicion of an individual high-ranking official?
In the report, certain names were named. Boyden Gray was named. Brent Scowcroft was named. On the second allegation, Mosbacher was named. Now, are these people guilty of crimes? We don't know. The issue is a simple one,
they did anything
and
specifically.
the issue is that there was enough evidence to appoint an independent counsel to give this a clear going over. And as for the charge of politics, Bill, you know, it's coming up before an election year is what you folks are saying.
It certainly is, and
people
it's certainly incidental
people like
happening
myself
right
and certainly Gonzales and Charlie Rose started these investigations as early as 1986, before George Bush was even president, Judy. And the reason that this has come to the fore now is simply that the administration finally came forward with a whole bunch of documents which Chairman Gonzales put in the record, which tightened the noose around their necks, at least on a policy basis and possibly on a criminal basis.
No criticism on my part. No criticism on my part about bringing this up. I mean, that's fine. That's fair game. There may have been bad judgment involved. It's a perfectly frank thing to talk about. But as far as criminal activity is concerned and using a special prosecutor, that's going way beyond the call. That's a very unique statute with very specific purposes. And frankly, Chairman Brooks didn't even come close to complying with his own statutory terms. I think that's hypocritical
there
as well as political.
There was another allegation you were going to outline that you said there was more.
Second allegation, unrefuted, is that in documents that were sent to Congressman Barnard and his subcommittee, this has popped up in not one subcommittee, not just Chairman Gonzales, who they like to paint as way over, but Chairman Barnard, a respected Southern conservative, and Chairman Rose, another Southern moderate. In Chairman Barnard's investigations, he wanted to know what military equipment was illegally sent to Iraq. In the Commerce Department letters that came back, it is unrefuted that the records were altered, that some military equipment was sent and it wasn't sent in the records. Now, who ordered the
points at who? Because of that, the finger points at who?
There was a man who was Assistant Secretary of Commerce named Klosky, who testified, unrefuted, that the records were altered. He said that he was told to alter the records in a phone conversation where he sat in the room with his superior, a Mr. Wilkie, who was on the phone with, quote, the State Department and the White House. We don't know who. We're saying that that is why we need an independent counsel to find out who, and there is no specifics in the statute that say you must name the name. If we knew the name, we might not need an independent counsel. It's sort of a catch-22 here.
All right, let me say, if I can respond, that particular point, that particular individual, that particular incident is something the Attorney General said in his letter today to Chairman Brooks. We say we're looking into that. We know that that is a potential problem of criminal law, and maybe there is a crime that's been committed here. We're investigating it, but it doesn't rise to the level of needing a special prosecutor to do it. We may very well indict somebody here. We might find that, but it is very routine for us to do it, and there's no conflict of interest down here in the Justice Department.
In all due deference, Bill, it is not routine for documents that are sent to Congress, particularly on a sensitive matter as this that could involve national security and American lives, to be altered. It is hardly routine.
And why can't you trust the Justice Department to investigate
That is the issue. I think Bill hit the nail on the head. Bill hit the nail on the head on that issue. He's saying, yes, a crime was committed. Yes.
We think there might be. I didn't say there is one. I'm saying they're investigating.
I'm sorry, you're right. There may have been a crime committed. Yes. Secondly, that this is a very sensitive issue. Now, you tell me, ask people, should the Attorney General appointed by the President look into this kind of sensitive issue, or should you get someone independent? The purpose of the independent counsel statute was not to be used willy-nilly. It's been used 11 times since 1978 when it happened. And in fact, for people who say that I want to use it willy-nilly, which when George Bush's son was up, there was a move in Congress to have him put before an independent counsel, and I got some criticism for stopping it because I didn't think it rose to the level of a criminal charge. But in this case, it clearly does. And if you ever wanted to do a political one, George Bush's son would be far more bait than this kind of thing.
Well, let me say, there's no indication at all of a connection between whatever this guy did or didn't do with anybody higher up. There's no indication of that. There was nothing in Chairman Brooks's letter to indicate that. He didn't even name this fellow, let alone anyone else tied to him. And the fact remains that the investigation is ongoing. And the fact remains the independent counsel law is flawed. And you and I both know that, Chuck. We both know that we have hearings coming up. I think there's witnesses on it tomorrow. And we know the fact of the matter is that it probably is going to expire in December because we don't have time to fiddle with it again this year. To get into five-year type investigations is ridiculous.
Let me just ask Congressman Schumer, what now for the Judiciary Committee? Does this matter rest now that you've gotten a no from the Attorney General? Does it rest
unfortunately, the decision of the Attorney General is not appealable in any legal sense. He makes the decision, and that's that. there are three choices. One, Congress could do its own investigation. We're not prosecutors. I think that's a bad way to go. The second, and the better way to do this is the second is to go back to the Attorney General. That's like a pig in a poke. No matter what you show him, he's not going to do it. The third is the court of public opinion. I think when the public hears about all this, and it will be an issue in the election campaign, the pressure will mount, and there will have to be some kind of independent investigation.
All right,
well,
gentlemen,
there's the rub. It will be an issue in the campaign, and
What?
that's the purpose, I really believe, of all of this
Bill.
coming up right now.
You know, you can't always cry politics. You got to judge.
Well, you
judge
can't
the
always,
merits.
but I
have
can't
to
in
leave
this
it
case.
there.
Got to judge the
Congressman
merits.
McCollum, Congressman Schumer.